Hello, welcome to another one of our videos, and this is another one in our series where we've been looking at individual muscles, which is something I don't do very often, as we're often looking at movement patterns. And today we're looking at rectus abdominis, which is pretty much the six-pack muscle that most people are trying to overdevelop with lots of abdominal or so-called core work. But and obviously the first one, which you can see here, is a abdominal crunch or a sit-up, whatever you want to call it. I'm showing you on a Swiss ball, and I'm going to come back to this later, but this is where it's commonly seen as developing strength into your core by doing sit-ups and even planks and so forth. And I've done so many videos about core strength before, I'm sort of sick of doing it, but I thought I'd use it. Seeing we've been going through all these body parts, I thought it'd be very important that we discuss this one as well. So right, so before we come to the sit-up, we're going to really go back to the beginning, like I do in all the other videos, and you've always got to address mobility restrictions that are going to either inhibit the muscle or make you compensate with the movement that you would be trying to use to build the strength. And in this case, it's very much the hips and the thoracic region. So I'm going to take you right back to the beginning of what I would be doing first before I look at any abdominal training. So even TVA activation, I'm going to really look at restrictions through the hips and thoracic region, just because they're going to basically sacrifice your core from working. It won't matter how strong you are. If you're too stiff to move through the hips correctly, you're going to move through the lumbar spine anyway. So this first stretch is a 90-90 stretch. So you see nearly all the videos we've done on the leg stuff, I've shown you this one. There's obviously many other versions of hip and glute and posterior chain releasing, so check the description on the video, because I'll put links to other articles and videos that might show you 10 or 15 different versions of the same thing, so you can find the right one for you. This is to just give you the idea of how you might want to release through the hip region, especially like TFL as well. Really dominating hip flexors is another version of a similar stretch what I was just doing then. Great way to do it if you don't have a partner to help you. But again, before I'm trying to strengthen and stiffen around my abdominal region, I've got to make sure I have full mobility in my hips. I may not be perfect, I just need to improve what I currently have and stop the dominating hip flexors from stealing all the work. So it gives you, if you've got the right exercise choice and you're doing it correctly, it has every chance of succeeding in what you're trying to achieve. All right, so that would be my hip region that I'd be looking at. The other part that I mentioned was the thoracic region. So again, there's more than one way to do this. I'm just showing you one of my preferred versions, and this is the thoracic rotation. I'd probably very much look at thoracic extension as well, but just to save time for this video so it doesn't go for 50 minutes, just giving you the concept of what you may look at. So this is like more of the upper region of the thoracic, where I'm more around the scapular region, and I'm looking at, do I have full mobility to rotate? And if I don't, I really need to work on that, because it means my rib cage is going to be already collapsed, and rectus abdominis, you can pretty safely assume, is already shortened. I don't know why I'd need to even strengthen it, because it's probably already in a mechanically advantaged position. All right, so once I've sort of working through those first few mobilities, then I'm going to work on just basic activation. So this is an exercise I'm doing here where I'm just activating my TVA, my transverse abdominis, in a basic 4-point position. Once I've sort of working through that, I can work into this bird dog or horse stance, whatever you prefer to call it, a very basic core drill. And this is where rectus abdominis is working not to provide trunk flexion, but basically to resist trunk flexion. It's trying to maintain acting in a stabilizing role, not in a moving role. All right, so obviously I need full hip extension with my hips on this, and I also need to have good shoulder stability. If either one of those is compromised, I start to develop this trunk flexion feeling. So very underrated exercise, this one, and again, I've used it many times in the past for those who've watched videos before. A great way to just ensure your stabilizers are on the job. All right, so before I'm trying to isolate any specific muscles, I'm trying to make sure that I have good mobility and good ability to stabilize my joints in movement. So now when I'm coming into strengthening, I'm going to work on the lower part of the rectus abdominis. So I'm going to use, now again there's many versions of this. I'm probably going to the third hardest. It'd be like level 3. I could just move one leg up and down and keeping one leg on the floor, or just move one leg to the floor before I move 2. This is the much harder version. And I prefer this version over the sit-up any day, because most people will fail this test when I first see them, but nearly everyone passes the upper abdominal test. Now, to be certain you're doing this correctly, what I'm doing showing you here is you put one hand under your back, because you don't want your back to be dead flat. You just want it to be neutral. And the size of your hand or your wrist really just ensures that you're not flat, but you have this natural curve. And your job is to try and keep your abdominals to maintain pressure on your hand while you're lowering your leg to the floor, because what often happens is as the person lowers their legs to the floor, if I just go back because I'm going to show you how hard it is, as that person lowers their legs to the floor from here, hang on, I'll just go back, here we go. So as they go from here to the floor, right about that point there is when the lumbar starts to overextend, because there's no core control. And sometimes that's happening because the hip flexors are driving the stabilizing. Alright, so this is why you need to release the tight hips at the start, because when they activate, they pull your hips into anterior tilt. They can't maintain neutral because they're trying to move your leg. Right, so that's their main purpose, is to move your leg, not to stabilize your lumbar spine. That should be done by your abdominals. But if they're over-dominating, that's exactly what happens. That's why you must release the tight muscles first, or weaken them from stretching or foam rolling or whatever, so that they can't try to take over all the workload on you. All right, so once you've moved past this basic kneeling one, then that's when I might go to the straighter leg. So this would be the harder version. This is when I basically my legs being straighter creates a bigger lever. All right, and the lever just makes my legs way more. All right, so when I have the legs bent, I've only got half of my leg to cover. Now I've got to cover my whole leg. All right, so a much more difficult exercise, very much an abused exercise in boxing classes. I commonly see this just really bastardized. Really, people don't have the control or the strength to be able to handle the straight leg one. All right. Again, check the description of the video, because I use like blood pressure cuffs to make sure that people are 100% perfect on this one often. All right. So once I'm moving from the lower leg, sort of the lower abdominal, I'll start to work through again. Before I go to the crunching, I'm going to working the rectus abdominis in the anti-trunk flexion. So this is the ab wheels or the rollouts. Again, probably a bit of a bastardized exercise again, but I probably still prefer this over the crunch and the sit-ups and even the planks, just because it has this moving element to it. So I really need to get good thoracic extension, I need some hip extension, and I need to be able to control it. I even need shoulder stability on this. So anyone who has shoulder problems will find this quite difficult, just because they're going to lose a lot of control around the shoulder girdle and the scapula. So this has a lot of things about it that's really good, and a very high threshold of muscle activation with this particular exercise. All right, so that'd be a great way to follow on from the leg lift. And then once I've got the hang of this one, not everyone can get to the range that I might be doing there, and that's fine. Work within your limits. Once I've moved through that one, then I can work into the crunches. All right, so now this is where I might decide to strengthen it. Very rarely do I need to, as I'll probably show you towards the end. In the integrated movements, you'll see it often kicks in anyway. Again, if someone presents with a real kyphosis posture, I won't be using this exercise because they're already in a sit-up. All right, and and I'm sure you can imagine how many people are in a kyphosis posture. There's a lot of them. Now, I will always use a Swiss ball over the floor for the simple reason that what I'm showing you here is I can go into full extension if I'm going to come into flexion. So flexion is this point here. So you can see this where I'm curled in a ball. So I'm really shortening the rectus abdominis right now. So there's no doubt about it. I'm definitely strengthening it. All right. I just need to make sure that if I'm going to shorten it, I need to make sure that I pose it, and you'll also notice my head and my neck will go into extension as well. So my upper back and my neck especially will go into extension, because often when you're on the floor you'll get shortening but you'll get no lengthening, and very rarely do people do the exercises in the opposite direction, or even standing up. Most of the time we're already in the shortened position all the time. So very important for the strength of the neck, especially the muscles underneath the neck, and I've done videos on this in the past before, so people with forward head posture, this is a great way to strengthen the neck. Alright, so if I am going to ever decide to strengthen rectus with a sit-up type movement, this would be the way I would do it, and in combination with the lower leg lifts. Alright, but once I've moved from these isolated things, I've mobilized and I've isolated, I really need to put it into play with integration. Alright, and that's where we look at your squats, your deadlifts and that. So let's have a look at those. Okay, so these are our integrated exercises, nothing fancy to see here. And again, people would not rate these as abdominal exercises, but make no mistake, they really are. And this is where you will see, especially when it's loaded, in that squat, and especially if you fatigue or you put too much weight on there, the very first thing that's going to happen is your body's going to you're going to go into trunk flexion. All right, you're going to fall into this where the rectus abdominis senses the threat, and it shortens it to assist in stabilization because you're past your stabilization threshold. All right, so the minute you get fatigued or you have too much load, that's what happened. You do not go into excessive extension in these loaded movements. In shoulder press, chin-ups even, deadlift, squats, every single exercise that's loaded in a standing position, once you pass your threshold, your rectus abdominis kicks in as a stabilizer, and it will flex on itself. So you will lose your ability to maintain your posture, as you see here. All right, so this is where your rectus is working as in a stabilizing mode. Even though you don't feel it, it's really trying to if you're working it correctly, it won't go into flexion. And so the stronger it can maintain its threshold in combination with all the other muscles, that's the other thing. So working it separately from its synergistic partners is where you can overdevelop it and ruin your other movements as it tries to take them over. All right, so firstly was the squat, and then we look at the deadlift. So again, this is where it's working in combination now with more the posterior chain, where the squats was very much the anterior chain. And you'll see like the rectus right there has to be opened out as the rib cage is lifted up. You won't be able to finish the range of motion if the rectus is stuck in this shortened position, and you'll have this kyphosis. You can really see how that muscle can really ruin the deadlift here and create all types of bulging disc problems and neck problems. All right, so again, it's working very hard. If you don't believe me, I've done videos on this recently showing you the EMG analysis on the abdominal wall when it's in integrated movements, and many of those integrated movements defeat the threshold or activation within the isolated ones. All right, so obviously we've looked at the squat, we've looked at the deadlift, we've looked at the lunge. I could keep going all the upper body ones as well, but just to give you an idea, the lunge a little bit different because we can get it on the move. So we could go for a static lunge like the other two where we're just going up and down on the spot. But when we go on the move, especially when we go forward, that's when the rectus can kick in because it'll have momentum moving that way, and your back extensors have got a counter. It's very easy. It's like mechanical advantage for the rectus abdominis when you're coming into this forward thing right now. So all the momentum's taking you this way, and the rectus can very easily over-contract and then pull you over like that. And that's where right now the back extensors are actually trying to contract to prevent you from going forward too much. All right, so it's where the forward lunge is a lot harder. Where when she steps backward, we're actually helping the back extensors here, because we've got the forward momentum. We've got the momentum going backward instead of forward. All right, so you get beginners to start with the backward lunge for that very reason. All right, so there's your lunges to showing you like the difference in the different activation, and then I've got Mel showing us from front on here, because then you can actually see when you've got these lunges again when you're coming up, where the abdominals are going to try and, when she comes into this single leg stance, where they've got to resist the mistake that we just saw there, where she falls out to the side, and this is where you're starting to work with the obliques. All right, so now the whole abdominal wall, because we're in the frontal plane now. All right, so all the movements up till now we've been in a sagittal plane, which is working straight in a forward back line, but in the frontal plane is where we always see the injuries problem and biggest problems occur. And you'll see that any time we go into single leg stance. All right, not many exercises are used often enough in the frontal plane, which is ironic considering, like I said, that's where all the problems are found. All right, so this is a great way to work your abdominal wall in the integrated movement, getting out of the isolated stuff that everyone does. All right, so again, I could keep going all day, but I think you get the idea. You know, and if you follow this sort of process, put it all together, you know, you can stay pretty well rounded. And if you really sort of don't see the need for the isolated things unless there's something wrong. If there's nothing wrong, you really just stick with your integrated ones and do them better, and you'll get everything out of it that you're looking for. All right, so I hope you enjoy that video, and we'll see you on the next one.